got a text from somebody that was like, did Norm come up with that, or did he hear it from someone else? Like, Norm's a pretty original dude. So,
I think I did come up with it. I mean, while we were sitting here playing, right? You know, yeah, that's right. Norm and Mike, Law and Legitimacy. And to those of you who wonder whether some of these turns of phrase that we come up with are original, or whether we stole them from restroom writing at Union Station in Washington, D.C., I'm pleading the fifth, but I'm not drinking it.
I saw this on the wall of a Waffle House bathroom.
Yeah, I'll bet you did. What were you doing in the Waffle House bathroom?
I will tolerate no Waffle House slander here, Norm.
All right, so it's we're off today to day 44, 45. I can't even remember, of United States of America versus Joe Biggs. And today, and the good news is that we're getting through a witness. We might even finish one this week. And it's likely that the government will rest sometime next week or the following, and we will then transition into the defense case. It is likely that the case will get to the jury sometime in late March, early April, and certainly that we will have a disposition, whether it's a verdict of guilty or not guilty, or no verdict, meaning the jury could not unanimously agree, remains to be seen. In the meantime, all of this is taking place against the overlay of now a national drama over what J6 means. And we've got in one corner Chuck Schumer in one corner coming out at the bell swinging is Tucker Carlson on Fox News, and in the other corner responding is Chuck Schumer, and they're both jabbing and punching at one another, trying to deliver body blows. And I've got a front row seat at the ring, and I think they're both shadow boxing, and I think this is a national tragedy. I watch. So what am I talking about here? Let me not bury the lead. I changed my mind last night on something fundamental, and I now believe that federal criminal trials need to be televised. And I have long been an opponent of televised trials, for the following reasons. All trial lawyers are prima donnas. All trial lawyers are trial lawyers because they like the stage. The prima donna in a trial lawyer sometimes interferes with the truth-seeking function because you're playing to the stage rather than seeking the truth. Adding a camera is like putting a case of beer at an AA meeting and saying to people, "Anyone thirsty?" And so I've thought that cameras were distracting. I've learned over time. I've had 4 or 5 trials that have been televised in state courts, and what I've found is that you ignore the camera almost immediately. Once the drama, the heat, the rhythm of trial goes, you're so into the moment, you don't know who's in the room other than your judge and your jury and your witness. And so I don't think it matters. Federal courts are hostile to having cameras in the trial, and the result is we have to rely on court reporting for what goes on at trial. And some court reporting is better than others. But court reporting is always very heavy on the direct testimony. That is, when the person calling a witness asks the who, what, where, when, and why questions, a court reporter is going to be able to understand that and get it into a story. The themes in cross-examination are very difficult to deliver, and there are very few Perry Mason moments in the real world where you can break a witness down and the witness says, "You're right, I lied, I made it all up." Generally, an effective cross-examination operates by what I call the acid rain theory. It may take several hours to demonstrate to a jury that your witness is an exaggerating, lying, piece of feces, and it's hard to report that impression. And most court reporters who write about trials for the general press don't even make the effort. So what you end up with in a criminal prosecution is very pro-prosecution reporting, not because the papers necessarily have a bias, but because it's easier to report on a direct exam on the government's witnesses than it is to report on a cross exam. Okay, I get that and I accept that. And I don't particularly care because jurors are the only people I care about when I'm trying a case. I don't worry about the press, except when the press might affect the jury, and except when the press might affect the country I live in and its ability to develop common norms, which is our goal here in Law and Legitimacy. So what does this have to, and so I think that the public has missed we have missed a tremendous opportunity to learn some simple truths about what happened on January 6th by not televising any of the January 6th trials. I've read the trial transcripts in the Oath Keeper case involving Stewart Rhodes, and I'm a participant in the Joe Biggs trial. We're now in, we had 11 or 12 days of jury selection, 33 or so days of evidence, and we've got a few more weeks to go. I know a thing or two about what the evidence says there, and I can't really talk about that in meaningful ways during the trial for fear that if I give a comment that is at variance with the evidence itself, as it invariably will. I'm a participant. Where you sit determines what you see. I'm an advocate in this case. If I make a extrajudicial, that is an out-of-court statement that could tend to prejudice the trial itself, even though the jurors aren't supposed to watch the television, I could get in professional difficulties. So I have to be very careful. Chuck Schumer doesn't have to be careful. Tucker Carlson doesn't have to be careful. Tucker Carlson has a First Amendment right to say whatever he likes about the trial, even if what he says is wrong. And so here's what I see or saw on Tucker Carlson the other day. As you know, Carlson has been given access by Kevin McCarthy, Speaker of the House, to 44,000 hours. We've now determined that that's the number of videotapes collected in the area of the Capitol relating to January 6th. I believe these videos encompass a 24-hour period surrounding the event and come from closed-circuit television cameras in the area, body cameras worn by officers, and such other video images as were gathered by investigators. That's a lot of stuff. I mean, 44,000 divided by 40. I don't know how many days that comes to. Michael, do the math. There's not a person alive who's going to be able to watch all that. The government, at least in the federal prosecutions, has created a database that helps sort all this stuff. They've used an accounting firm. And if you're a defense lawyer, you get a password and access to this. And you even are given free orientation classes on how to navigate the database. And it helps you find things. And what the government has provided defense lawyers to is 14,000 hours of videos. That's 1/3 of the 44,000, a little less than 1/3 of the 44,000 hours that Tucker and company have been given. Now, initially, my reaction to that is, hey, wait a minute, how come the government withheld 2/3 of the data? Well, because much of it was in buildings unrelated to the event. Much of it was stuff that occurred long before the event. Very little of it was deemed out of bounds. In other words, very little of it was deliberately withheld from the government. And what was withheld on grounds that it didn't pertain directly to the events our clients were charged with committing, and disclosure of the material might undermine the security of the Capitol, meaning, the exact evacuation route that senators and congressmen took. We chose not to litigate those claims in the Biggs case because I don't think it's relevant what evacuation routes people took. Carlson has been given the ability to have staff people go to Washington in a room somewhere in the congressional complex and watch these videos. And so now he's beginning to air what he and his staff have seen. It's not clear what criteria they used to select what they've seen, but they have made selections. And those selections reflect, I think, Carlson's biases. And that's fine. He has a First Amendment right to do that. We all, in the marketplace of ideas, can talk our perspectives. But he focused on one of the most dramatic individuals in the trials thus far, the so-called Q shaman, Mr. Chansley, I think it is. And in the videos that he's shown, you see Chansley walking calmly through the halls of Congress inside the building. You don't see videos about how he got in. And as he's walking, he's talking calmly to officers who appear to be accompanying him. Those officers appear to lead him. Those officers appear to guide him as he walks through the Capitol. They test a locked door with him at one point, and they all turn when the door doesn't open. Later in the video, the Q shaman is seen to be leading a prayer. I believe it's in the Senate chambers, and he gives thanks to God for the officers letting people into the Capitol and showing him around. And you're seeing some of the videos online. Now, if you're looking at that video, and that's all you know about January 6th, it kind of looks like a high school field trip. There's a visiting dignitary. Why, it's the Q shaman. Hey, let's show him around. This is where we debate bills on this. This is where we do that. Hey, sure, have a seat in the Senate chamber. And that's perfectly peaceful. Carlson has used this to assert that what we've been told about January 6th is a lie, that this was a peaceful protest, and that this is evidence of it. Taken in isolation, that video makes that point. Schumer gets on the floor of the Senate yesterday and basically calls, in a way that is chilling for a United States senator, for censorship. He calls for Murdoch and Fox to prevent Mr. Carlson from offering any more such commentary. Listen.
Here, I'll play it.
To his audience. Fox News host Tucker Carlson ran a lengthy segment last night arguing the January 6th Capitol attack was not a violent insurrection. By diving deep into the waters of conspiracy and cherry-picking from thousands of hours of security footage, Mr. Carlson told the bold-faced lie that the Capitol attack, which we all saw with our own eyes, was somehow not an attack at all. He tried to argue it was nothing more than a peaceful sightseeing tour.
All right, and so Schumer goes on.
Demonstration.
Schumer goes on in that vein, and then he says, well, and Carlson ignored that this was a direct threat to our democracy and so forth. I've got news for all of you. Both these guys are full of shit. And excuse my language. And I like Tucker Carlson. I mean, I've got, I communicate with him personally. I don't communicate with Schumer. I respect Carlson's voice and support his ability to speak. If the public had seen the evidence in any one of these trials, they would know the truth. This was a violent event. There was violence at the event. I can't say more other than to say that the video streams that we have seen in this trial show a perimeter with hand-to-hand conflict between officers and rioters. I'll call them rioters rather than insurrectionists. And people were injured, and projectiles were thrown. People were bowled over. There was a standoff in a tunnel that looked like the Battle of Thermopylae, with the Spartans against the Persians. In this case, the Spartans won and the crowd was repelled. There was violence there. Schumer's right. Tucker's wrong. End of discussion. But why we're permitting the airwaves to be commandeered by people telling quarter, 1/8, 1/16 truths, when the whole truth was right there to be seen by as much of the American public as had the stomach to watch it, that is the trial, why we sacrifice that opportunity is a real shame. And I understand the policy perspective, wanting to maintain the dignity and decorum of the federal courts and wanting to keep trials private for that reason, so that the business of justice is done in an august atmosphere. But this trial, the reaction to the January 6th events, the handling of the videotapes, I think calls for a wholesale rethinking of the bar against publicizing or having the public or the media attend trials, because the American people need to know the truth. It was violent. Now, having said that, I don't think it was an insurrection, and I don't think it was a threat to the heart of democracy either. I think Schumer's preaching to the cheap seats just like Tucker is. And the thing that I am so mortified by is, in real time, I am watching January 6th become the next red hot potato in the burnt finger session, the burnt finger game of pass the potato we call politics in the United States. It started with birtherism and believing that Obama wasn't born here, and therefore, and he had a fake birth certificate, and therefore the man we elected president couldn't be president. It ended up with the Russian invasion or the Russian influence hoax regarding Donald Trump. It transformed itself into election denialism in 2020, and the same sort of red hot incendiary rhetoric that is frying, incinerating the ties that bind us as a republic is finding new life on the eve of the 2024 election and is being unfolded in an incendiary and violent manner in the rhetoric on our screens. And we have the ability to recontextualize it. I know it's too late to televise a trial that is now probably 65-70% over. That is United States of America versus Biggs. And when the trial is over, I'm hoping that I'll be able to talk at length about what I saw there. But what I can tell you, if you care enough to be watching this and you care about the topic, the truth is the truth. You can see it with your own eyes. You can hear it with your own ears. There is an external reality out there, and there are events that communities of reasonable minds can gather about, discuss, and debate. And in the Biggs case, the jury will have to decide whether there was a conspiracy to engage in the use of force against the authority of the United States government and related conspiracies based on evidence, based on text messages, based on oral communications, based on video evidence that was captured that day, that has been examined, presented by one side, cross-examined and interrogated by the other side. And then both sides will have the opportunity to argue to the jury what the facts mean, what reasonable inferences can be drawn from those facts, and the community, the jury, as the consciousness of the community, sitting in judgment over the case that the United States of America has brought against these men, that jury will decide the facts and presented to it by the judge in this case. To have Chuck Schumer making these asinine assertions from the Senate of the floor, and Tucker Carlson presenting 116, 132nd truths, soundbite truths, in an effort to recast the entire event is an insult to the American people, and permitting this to be weaponized on the cusp of the 2024 election is a national tragedy. And so if anybody in the Federal Judiciary Center is watching this, if anybody cares, we need to televise these January 6 trials to save the republic. And I'm not saying this for sweeps week for Norm. My trial will be over hopefully within a month, and I can go back to the obscurity I so richly deserve. But the American public deserves to know the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth about what happened at January 6th. And the fact of the matter is that's a very, very complicated mosaic. Law enforcement was unprepared for the events as they occurred that day. The government probably knew a whole lot more about what was likely to occur than it ever shared with anybody. And there is good reason to believe there were confidential informants embedded with a lot of these groups. There were many groups involved. And some of them, and there were many groups with different motives, and lots of people who were reacting to a chaos in a tense and evolving set of circumstances. And those are the pieces of the puzzle. What picture you're able to discern in that's what trials are about. And I just hate to see this complex event, an event that Schumer calls one of the most significant in our recent history, one of the most significant attacks ever on the Capitol. I hate to see this transformed into cheap political theater, and that's exactly what's happening. It's just
not to mention, Norm, and just not to mention this. Certainly, this undermines the intense and incredible and macroscopic almost effort of the defense team, right? For each of these 5 defendants who are members of the Proud Boys, but for legal counsel for any of these J6 defendants, right? What you're talking about is allowing the good and the positive efforts of litigators, criminal defense litigators, and even in this context, we know that there are attorneys involved at a high level that historically are not criminal defense attorneys. That's not what they brand themselves to be, but they have committed themselves to the notion of due process, right? To upholding these tenets of civil liberties, right? And individual rights, and all of the positive stuff that's going into ensuring that the trial is fair. Because Norm, as long as I've known you, that is exactly what you have promised each and every defendant that you have chosen to represent. It is to make the government do its job, to carry its burden, to show, improve the allegations against an individual defendant. The more that we allow Tucker Carlson and Chuck Schumer and Kevin McCarthy and Mitch McConnell to abscond with this really sort of meta kind of diluted kind of synthetic narrative, right? The less that we get to shine a light on the merits of the case in chief. And if there was some sort of seditious conspiracy to overthrow or a coup to decertify the election, which you strenuously object to, right? At least that is there for the public to see. I mean, we don't have to look very far, right? We don't have to look very far on Rumble, right? What is it, Rekieta Law? And there's several other big things. I mean, any other normal trial out in the world, right? You have tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of viewers. And no doubt that's going to be what happens when it comes to the events over in Idaho, right? With that defendant, it's what's happened with the Murdoch trial, right? In South Carolina. You know, the public has a view into what available information the jury is seeing, what arguments are being made, what experts and what witnesses are put on the stand, how the judge is maintaining that level of probative value versus, you know, overly prejudicial as it relates to the evidence. But no one's getting to see that. That's been part of the problem with the lack of reporting, right? We've got Brandy Buckman, and then there's one other gentleman, I forget his name right now while I'm
Randy Parnoff, yeah.
Right. But other than that, that is the window into the J6, and specifically we're talking about the Proud Boys, which, I mean, this is the main event of all of this, right? Of the litigation to come out of this, the criminal prosecution to come out of January 6, 2021. This is the main event. For anybody watching, this is the main event. Norm is involved in the main event, and yet we don't get any insight into that, right?
Well, it's, you know, and you know, and that was okay with me until I saw the Tucker v. the Carlson v. Schumer thing, because you know, I saw this with the Alex Jones case to a lesser degree, even though it was very significant there. There was a narrative that got supported, and then there's the truth. And you know, so the narrative in Jones is, you know, he was, you know, that he libeled these families and has to pay him 1.5 billion, and that justice was done. No justice was done there. He was defaulted by a rogue judge who concluded that his efforts to comply with discovery violated court orders and weren't substantial enough, and therefore she treated him as though he never cooperated in the litigation process. This notwithstanding having provided hundreds of thousands of emails, hundreds of documents, he and his people sitting for dozens of depositions. The fact of the matter is the plaintiffs just didn't like the answers they got. And the result is they obtained a default and restrictive court orders that permitted them to present a false narrative to the jury, which is that Jones made millions of dollars profiting off of the sorrow of Sandy Hook families. Just didn't happen. But that narrative was advanced. We'll address it on appeal. That was harmful, but it was harmful in my view to the First Amendment because Jones is an outspoken, controversial figure. That's idiosyncratic, though. That's related to Jones and his supporters. This case, the January 6th, the Proud Boys case, relates to the health of the republic. And you know, I don't agree with Schumer that this was a direct threat to our democracy. And I'll be happy to talk more about why the evidence in this case supports that when the trial is over. But I think the American people are entitled to wonder just what happened there that day, and how do we call Senator Schumer's bluff when he's out there on prime time television while my jury is out evaluating the evidence, talking to the American people, telling them what he thinks the evidence means, when he's one of the highest elected leaders in the nation. And, you know, in criminal defense and in civil law as well, jurors are instructed to avoid media. And there's an old canard in the law, a doctrine. A properly instructed jury is presumed to follow the law. But how in this environment with Tucker Carlson versus Senator Schumer is a jury supposed to avoid hearing about this? Do we really want to believe that jurors have spent a couple months of their lives 8 hours a day in a room with 15 lawyers, which I wouldn't wish on anyone, and not care? Now, you know, they may not have cared about this case at all when it began, and maybe they care never to hear another word about it. But if they're at home and this comes on the dial, do I really think they all got up and ran over to turn the television off? Of course not.
That's right. Well, Sparkly Reese makes this observation as well. She says, I would argue the immediate and complete use and launch of the quote insurrection end quote narrative started the shambolic political handling. And that's my issue with it almost entirely, is that
shambolic. I'm loving this. Yeah.
it's my issue with it almost entirely is that there needs to be some level of accountability or obligation on the part of all of these major media outlets that are pushing this to their primetime viewers and monetizing this as much as they can to cover the actual thing. There was something that was branded a certain way at a certain point in time in the past, but now the main event is ongoing. And all we have, just to give you the math, because you did tell our viewers I would do the math, 44,000 hours equates to 1,833 plus straight 24-hour days of footage. 1,800 plus. 14,000 hours is like 583 complete 24-hour days consecutively worth of video footage to cull through. What we're looking at online, like you started this stream, Norm, by saying is cherry-picked, well, and I would use Schumer's stuff against him, cherry-picked arguments on both sides or cherry-picked whatever here. That has nothing to do with what the jury is making a decision on in this case or in any of the others, right? That surrounding narrative that Trump wants to build up about the January 6th report being a sham or whatever, that has nothing to do with this. And by the way, I think I sent you a text and I said we have a bunch of imperfect solutions to this in terms of people and mechanisms. You know, Trump is going to say he's going to try and denounce the January 6th report as being a sham, right? But at the same time, he hasn't done anything he hasn't lifted a finger to assist in the litigation, the defense litigation or otherwise, of those who were on trial who were his supporters, who were there on his behalf.
Nor have we yet to be able to find a way to serve him. Oh, Donald, we'd like you to testify. Please come to trial. So, it's a frustrating event. The takeaway for me is after 30 plus years of being opposed as a matter of form to televising trials, I now believe that criminal trials should be televised. I think that if it's important enough to spend state and or federal tax dollars to lock someone up for a significant portion of their life, it's important enough for the public to know how its government is choosing to use its resources. And in a case involving public authority and attacks on public authority, as this case is, I think the public needs to have adequate information. It is a national tragedy, and I'm choosing my words carefully, a national tragedy that a deeply divided nation goes into the 2024 electoral season weaponizing a very significant event in our recent history based on half-truths, lies, and misperceptions. And so, shame on Tucker Carlson and shame on Chuck Schumer. The truth is right there. And we can't publicize a transcript. I don't know who will read the transcript. I think we're up to now 16,000 pages of trial transcript when we get our daily reports. I pity, I hope to win and that no one will have to take an appeal. I pity the appellate lawyer who's going to have to read it all if we do lose. So there you go. Publicized, we need to have public federal trials. And I guess I thought we'd begin with this. I didn't know we'd almost end with it. What else is going on in the wide world out there today, Mike?
Well, I knew this was going to be the case, so I want to take this opportunity to thank. We've had a very, very active chat this morning, and please understand that when Norm is on one, I am not going to, if I can help it, break his chain of thought there.
My chain of loose associations. Yeah.
Right. I mean, all the regulars are here, and I love the comments. I did ask the question as to whether federal criminal trials should be televised, and I think there's almost a complete unanimous sense in the chat here that although there are arguments to not, that in this case it seems quite obvious that the need is there. So please put a thumbs up on this video. I think most of you have. Please also consider subscribing to us on Locals. we're gonna take this "Make America Think Again" hashtag and do a few things with it.
But first, I know you cynics out there, you see conspiracies everywhere, and you're wondering what are they really up to, and you're thinking, wait a minute. Now, Norm, we know he's a loudmouth ne'er-do-well who would defend his own shadow against the crime of associating with a criminal. We know that, but why is he associating with Mike, and what's Mike's motive? Oh, yes, drinks and beverages. Wait a minute. They are just warming this up so that they can subtly change it after a beer or two into "Make America Drink Again." And before you know it, they're going to be calling for an amendment to the United States Constitution requiring children to have drinks when they go to these twerking sessions with transgender activists at the age of 6. "Make America Think Again" is not a prelude to decrepitude or to depravity. It is our goal to make you think again.
Absolutely. This is Law and Legitimacy. Tomorrow, I think we're going to talk a little bit about Chris Rock's Selective Outrage. That's now streaming on Netflix. We're going to get Norm an account on Netflix because that's how much of a nerd this guy is. He doesn't have one. So, Norm can chill, but he just can't Netflix and chill, at least until later this evening. And then we'll also take a look at the Second Circuit appeal from the NRA. That was something that we wanted to get into yesterday. And Norm, you also sent me another article to look at. I think that's regarding a Missouri state gun law being ruled as unconstitutional as well. So much happening and the NRA, just to be frank, is a First Amendment case. I think that's what makes it distinct in and among sort of the Second Amendment gun rights thing. That is a First Amendment case, but there is quite a lot of activity on the front of the Second Amendment that we'll start delving into.
And we're going to shift into a lot of legal coverage because the year is coming to an end. At least, the Supreme Court usually announces its most significant decisions come June or so. And so, there's a lot of legal activity to report on. Federalism is bursting at the seams. The ties that bind this country are strained and stretched, but they're not yet broken. And lawyers and the law seek to hold the country together in a uniform vision of the common good. Will it work? Your guess is as good as mine, and we'll keep guessing, and we'll find out tomorrow what progress we have made toward making America think again.
That's absolutely right. All right, Norm. Well, are you going to warm up for me?
Objection! Objection!
Overruled.
Thank you, sir. It's always kind to be overruled by you.
All right, Norm. We'll see you tomorrow morning.
Thanks.